Gente, boa noite. Eu vou mais uma vez fazer a minha audiodescrição. É, eu sou Carol Aguiar, eu sou uma mulher branca de cabelos compridos, castanho claro, meio grisalho, eu tô de óculos, eu uso um fone com fio vermelho, eu tô usando uma camisa xadrez azul escura. Eu tô aparecendo da altura dos ombros para cima, atrás de mim um fundo de parede branca. É, e eu queria dar boas-vindas a todos aqui hoje, né? A gente vai agora assistir a palestra da Gayle Porter. Eu vou apresentar a Gayle para vocês, para quem não conhece. Então, Gayle Porter, ela é uma fonoaudióloga australiana com mais de 40 anos de experiência prática no trabalho com pessoas com necessidades complexas de comunicação. Gayle é cofundadora e fonoaudióloga sênior do Centro de Educação de Paralisia Cerebral em Melbourne, na Austrália. Ela também tem um consultório particular que trabalha com indivíduos com necessidades complexas de comunicação em sua comunidade. Gayle desenvolveu e publicou recursos sobre o livro de comunicação POD e conjuntos de páginas para dispositivos geradores de fala. Ela é autora de artigos, publicações e capítulos sobre comunicação alternativa e paralisia cerebral. A palestra da Gayle, ela é pré-gravada, né, com legenda, e a Gayle entra no final, então, para responder perguntas. Quem tiver perguntas, por favor, mande pelo chat. Eu vou pedir a gentileza das pessoas não fotografarem slides onde apareçam imagens de crianças e pessoas atendidas pela Gayle. Ela tem autorização para compartilhar essas imagens e vídeos nas apresentações, mas não para compartilhar em redes sociais. Então, eu peço que, se vocês quiserem fotografar a apresentação, que fotografem nos slides onde não apareçam imagens das crianças e clientes da Gayle. Tá? Eu vou compartilhar agora a minha tela com o vídeo da Gayle. E eu vou compartilhar também no chat, eu vou compartilhar os slides dela em português. Eu vou ver como que a gente pode colocar isso na plataforma depois para todos os participantes. Com um prazer enorme, eu apresento a vocês Gayle Porter, com a apresentação arte, né, que é a comunicação, autonomia, acessibilidade, requisitos, competência e hábitos para comunicação a qualquer momento, planejando resultados significativos.
Thank you for inviting me to your Congress in Brazil. It's a great honor to be here at the beginning of a few days of exciting discussions on augmentative and alternative communication. As we begin looking at research and at ideas for implementation for individuals who have complex communication needs, I think it's always useful to have a way of evaluating the various strategies, to think about planning for meaningful outcomes. And so this is what I'm going to talk about this evening. Your topic, expanding communicative modalities, people and technology. We have to start, what is the purpose of ASC? How will it enhance people's lives? Lewis Carroll in Alice's Adventures in Wonderland writes that Alice came up to the Cheshire Cat and said, "Please, would you tell me, please, which way I ought to go from here?" And the Cheshire Cat responds, "That depends a good deal on where you want to get to." And the challenge for us in ASC is that many professionals, parents, friends, support workers may never have interacted with a competent adult user of ASC. We're teaching things that we may never have experienced in its competence form. So how do you evaluate the possibilities? How do you know which way to go? Where do you want to go? What are the desirable outcomes? These are questions we need to ask ourselves. This is an approach or some concepts that I developed in the early 1990s when I had at that stage worked for, over a decade in this field. And I'd had the experience of meeting up or hearing about individuals I'd worked with early in my career, and they'd achieved certain things using ASC. But then were they actually using it in their daily life? And I realized that I could do a lot of different things with augmentative and alternative communication tools and technologies, but I needed a way of evaluating that intervention, of looking at how do I actually get to long-term meaningful outcomes. And some of these concepts come from the ASC literature, some of them I came up with. And these are the long-term outcomes, the aims of ASC: to develop communication autonomy, communication accessibility, to meet varied communication requirements, to develop communication competence, and to establish habits for communication at any time. And these critical concepts, I realized one day that in English I could reorder them to come up with the word arch, which is very useful because these are the concepts that overarch every decision that I make working with individuals who have complex communication needs, and to evaluate, is what I'm doing actually having a meaningful effect for these individuals in their daily lives. So I'm going to talk a bit more about these concepts. The first one being autonomous communication, or communication autonomy, which is being able to say whatever I want to say to whoever I want to say it to, whenever and wherever I want to say it, however I choose to say it. And autonomous communication is different from choice making, which is selecting a preference from other people's options, the options other people offer you. So, for example, you may say to a young person, do you want to go bowling or do you want to come shopping? The person selects bowling. But then they get to bowling and they don't seem that happy or that engaged. And people sometimes make the error of saying, but he said he wanted to come bowling. But no, he didn't actually say he wanted to come bowling. He selected to go bowling when the other option was shopping, which he really doesn't like. People sometimes ask a yes/no question. Do you want to come bowling? And they go, oh yeah, because, bored, not much else going on. And then when they get to bowling, they're not that engaged. And people say, but he said he wanted to come bowling. No, he didn't. He agreed to come bowling. So these are different from autonomous communication, which originates in the thought of the speaker. When that individual was being asked, do you want to come bowling or do you want to go bowling or shopping? He was actually thinking, I'd like to go fishing. If he'd been able to say, I want to go fishing, to generate those words, then we could say he said he wanted to go fishing. So autonomous communication is the ability to express your own thoughts in your own words. Now, there's nothing wrong with offering people choices or answering yes/no questions. It's just really important to know that that's not what people are saying autonomously. We all select preferences. We go into a restaurant and we're faced with a menu and we select off the menu. And autonomous ordering would be us going into the restaurant and asking the chef to cook us something we really felt like. It's really important to know the difference between selecting, agreeing, and saying. So with autonomous communication, we have to ask, whose message is it? You know, autonomous communication would be this little boy being able to say blocks. Or maybe his message is, I don't want to play. Or maybe his message is sore foot. So the first thing we remember, or the first assumption or underlying belief when we're doing ASC intervention, is that this individual may have things to say we can't guess. That they have thoughts that we can't guess, that they may need to communicate. This sometimes can sound like quite a big idea, communication autonomy. And sometimes people think, yeah, that's great for the people who have the most sophisticated language. But autonomous communication is not necessarily sophisticated or complex language. It's being able to communicate in the words you're thinking. So if you have a significant intellectual disability, your thought is less complex. Therefore, the language you need to express that thought may be less complex. So, for example, if the only thing I thought to say today was to tell my brother to go away, and I could say, go away, then I'm autonomous. Conversely, if you have complex abstract thought, you're going to need quite sophisticated or complex abstract language in order to express that thought. So communication autonomy does not necessarily tell us the complexity of the language that is used. And autonomous communication is also not necessarily operationally independent. Another person may have a role in operating an ASC system to enable an individual to say what they want to say. So what do we need for autonomous communication? We need the ability to generate our own messages in our own words. And spelling enables us to generate our own words from scratch. Here, when I say spelling, I don't mean spelling poor words only. I mean being able to spell any word I'm thinking. Or doesn't even have to be correct or conventional spelling all the time. It means being able to spell it, a word, or attempt to spell a word in a way that's intelligible to the partner. It's being able to use spelling to say any word you're thinking, including new and novel words. And this is why for all individuals with complex communication needs, it's important that they are involved in a robust literacy program that supports their development of spelling as far as they're able to do. If that individual currently can't spell any word I'm thinking and they're using a whole word symbol ASC system, then the degree of autonomy will be influenced by the size and the diversity of the vocabulary pool. The larger the pool of vocabulary they have available in the system, the more likely it is that the word that I'm thinking is there. So we need systems that provide opportunities to have a larger vocabulary so they can select the words they want to say from the words available in the system. And so we're going to need efficient organizations within those systems to support more frequent autonomous communication. So communication autonomy, very important concept. The second A in the arch is communication accessibility. Communication is always two-way. A reality of ASC intervention is we cannot just intervene with the individual alone, that we have to intervene to support their partners and to create more accessible communication communities. Individuals who use ASC need people in their social environment who understand the alternative communication form, who can help them learn it, can scaffold it, can help them learn it in the acquisition period while they're learning that language, and are willing and able to communicate in a manner that gives the individual maximum communication autonomy, so that they have learnt how to move into that slower speed that people who use a communication aid require, that they are supporting that individual to take the time they require to communicate their own messages in their own words. That they're not jumping in and guessing and talking for the individual. So communication accessibility is critical, as is communication partner training and creating communication accessible communities. The R in the arch refers to meeting varied communication requirements. So this goal or purpose for ASC, I wrote in the early 1990s as a way of clarifying what it is I needed to do. What are the criteria? How do you evaluate outcomes? How do you evaluate strategies? So the purpose of ASC is to enable the individual to meet all of their varied communication requirements as intelligibly as they can, intelligibly with a range of partners, as specifically as they want to. So if I'm thinking the word awesome, I should be able to say that word. I shouldn't be limited to just saying good because it's the only word I can say that you'll understand, or it's the only positive opinion word in my system. If I'm thinking to say awesome, to express my personality, I should be able to say awesome. You know, that might help you make friends, influence people, be interesting to interact with. If I want to tell the story of Grandma's cat up the tree, I don't want to be limited by my vocabulary to just introduce the topic, and so Grandma Cat. And then my parent or support worker or someone who knows me well goes on and tells the whole story. Because as you know, everyone tells a story differently. They're selling the story in their words, and now everybody's interacting with them, not with me. So as specifically as you want to, as efficiently as you can. Now, specifically and efficiently can appear in conflict, because if you want to be more specific, you might take you a bit longer to access more specific words, to put words together into a sentence. What we really mean is as efficiently as you can, given how specific you want to be. There are some apps in ASC that sort of say you can get every word in 2 selections. They're focused on the efficiency. But when I hear that, I think, which words did you leave out? Are we compromising the person's ability to be as specific as they want to be? The next criteria is independently as possible. And then in as socially valued a manner as possible. That one doesn't mean that people who use AC have to be polite and sweet and wonderful and nice. Why that last one was put in is I realised that if I don't want my drink, it will be intelligible, specific, very efficient and independent to throw my cup across the room. However, if that's how I'm communicating, I don't want a drink, It's not going to help me win friends and influence people. And using those types of behaviors or actions to communicate, could result in me not being invited to my sister's wedding when I grow up. It can be life limiting in terms of the environments you'd be involved with. So that's what we mean by socially valued, not the same as polite. So in a way, that's not going to limit your life experiences. And the ASC, the purpose of ASC is both to help individuals understand others and to be understood. Some people benefit from the use of augmentative and alternative communication to support their understanding, to learn language. These individuals might have difficulty processing or hearing or learning language through the auditory channel, through spoken language. And so we need to address their ASC needs to understand others, as well as the needs to express yourself. So it's not just looking at expression. We need to look at, is ASC needed to support someone's understanding as well? And when we look at the varied communication requirements, we're talking about all of the varied purposes of communication. Communication is for so much more than what do you want, what's wrong. What do you want, what's wrong is a real adult partner focus. We're trying to make sure the person's all right. So we're thinking, what do you want? What's wrong? I want to make sure you're okay. But even in first words, toddlers use their emerging language communication to joke, to manipulate, to bargain, to complain. Some functions like relating information of past or future events might, be acquired a little later, sort of more like 3 years of age rather than 12 to 18 months of age. But communication for all of these varied purposes. And so in addition to a belief that the individual has something to say we can't guess, that this individual has thoughts and ideas that we can't guess at, for communication autonomy, there's also a belief that this person is a human being, and like every other human being, needs to communicate for a full range of varied communication functions and purposes. Okay, so all of the different varied communication functions, the communication requirements that enable them to participate fully in their daily life. And this goal or purpose for ASC helps us do our job, because using that goal helps us clarify that our actual job is to problem solve how each individual can meet their varied communication requirements, to understand others and express themselves. If you begin ASC intervention there, not with the tool, not with the strategy, but what does this person need to communicate to be intelligible, specific, efficient, independent, socially valued? If we problem solve how they can understand others and express themselves for a full range of purposes, messages, topics, social roles, partners, environments, and physical positions, how they can express themselves, how they can communicate in a way so that they're known in the world as the people they are, rather than the people other people say they are. That's basically our job in ASC. And the answers to the solutions are multiple modes of communication. We all use multiple modes to communicate, and we choose the most effective message to get our message across. And which modality may be more effective depends on what the message is, what the situation is, what the partner is. I'm just now going to show you a little video of Nick demonstrating how multimodal communication may be used to get a message across in this specific situation. So one of the things you need to know before you watch this video is that the Cerebral Palsy Education Centre, we have just moved locations. And we have not as yet packed away all of the toys. So when Nick points off the screen, he's pointing to a big pile of toys that has not been packed away. Now, if we had a neater environment, the point might have worked. But let's see how Nick, at 2.5, is problem solving. Which modality do I need to use to communicate my message to Gail in this situation?
Over there, yeah.
Now, Nick did this. This is not a recognised Australian sign, okay? However, if I had have been his mother, I would have immediately known what he was talking about, because he had been going around doing this at home frequently. So if I was his mum, I would have understood that. We would have been good. You know, I would have looked at the toys. I would have seen this. We would have been great. But I'm not his mum, so I didn't understand it. So I need to ask him, tell me more. Point.
Yeah, action work activities. That's for making something, isn't it? For painting.
So what I've seen standing out of the toys is a big easel, a painting easel. And in Australian sign, that is paint. But you can sign it paint here up on the wall. So I thought, oh, maybe he's approximating paint and he's saying easel. No, I'm wrong. He's going to need to use aided.
Yeah, the side activities. Basketball. Wasn't the painting. It's a basketball hoop. Nick, have a look. Do you want to play basketball? Yeah. Ask Julie.
Okay, we can, yeah, we can do that. Basketball, yeah.
Barbel. Why didn't he just verbally say barbel from the beginning? Because at 2.5, Nick's not going to try and say words he knows we won't understand. When he goes barbel, we're going to go looking for bubbles and rabble on about other things. Does it? This is one of the things people often don't understand about children who have difficult to understand spoken language. It's not just what is intelligible or not when they attempt to say a word. It's words they're not even attempting to say because they know we won't understand. It's what isn't being said. But anyway, he's got ASE. He's got aided to ASE, and using that, which is slower than his speech or his sign if the others had worked, but got his message across, was intelligible for me, specific enough for him. By using the aided ASE, he could establish what the meaning is. And now we all know he's talking about basketball. He can attempt to use his speech. And this is one of the reasons why aided ASE and the research evidence and systematic reviews have come back with this over and over again. Does not prohibit the development of speech. If it does anything, it supports the development of speech. Because with the intelligible as communication, Nick can now try and use his speech. And in using his speech, he can get feedback, he can have that experience. I may be able to use, specific strategies to help him to communicate that more intelligibly as a speech pathologist. So now we know he's talking about basketball, he can use his speech. So what we're going to do with Nick is give him as many tools in his toolbox as possible so that he can select the modality that's going to work given the partner, the message, and the situation. We'll teach him multimodal communication.
We can do that.
Okay.
When you do a bit of
Maybe,
walking.
okay.
Mm.
Days and times. After, what is after? After, can you do that one? Okay, come in here. Go go. After. After, that's it. After.
So the more possibilities he has, the more likely it is that he has a method to be intelligible with different partners for different types of messages in different situations. And Blackstone and Hunt-Berg sort of point out that the individual does not abandon simpler strategies in the march towards independence. Instead, the individual acquires more and more sophisticated communication methods to add to an existing repertoire. And individuals who use ASE, unaided sign and gesture, aided communication using a communication aid, they are always considering the multimodal communication. Which way will be intelligible, specific enough, efficient, independent to communicate this type of message in this situation? For us, we can be wasteful with spoken words, speech, and our spoken language is very efficient. Works for us a lot of the time. But when you're an aided communicator, you're not going to sit there and spell out every letter, letter by letter. Can you please pass me the salt? When you can just look at the salt on the table. So for individuals who use ASC, they rely on their multiple modes more frequently as they go through which way it's going to work for me to meet this communication requirement in this situation with this partner. Von Tetzchner and Grove remind us that the function of communicative abilities is to solve communication challenges. So I think this is very, very important because sometimes ASC falls apart for individuals and their families because our interventions are trying to get people to use ASC strategies, aided language, in a situation where it's more efficient just to point. And then they don't build their understanding of all of the other messages you can't communicate without using the communication aid or device. So if the cup is present, why would I go through a system that's slower to ask for a drink when I can just point to it? And so if your interventions come in and focus on making them go through the slower mode, the families, the individuals, see ASC as a task. I think, well, it's quicker for me. They just pointed it. And they may not realize, but you can't communicate to someone just by pointing at a cup at a table, or last night I had the best cafe latte ever. You can't just point to that. So it's really important we understand multimodal communication and apply those criteria of intelligibly, specifically, efficiently, independently, socially valued to the decisions that we support people to learn how to use multimodal communication. In reality, we all use ASE. We all use ASE when something external or internal constrains or limits the effectiveness of our spoken language. You know, if it's in a noisy pub, noisy bar, and you want your friend to get you a drink, you might, hey, because your speech isn't going to work in that noise. You might point to a picture of the drink on the wall that you want. You know, that's aided communication, gesture. When you're traveling internationally in a country where you don't speak the language, you'll point to things, you'll gesture, you know, they'll show you things on maps, whatever. These days we open up our phones and do Google Translate, which is an aided form of communication. Over distance, we're all using aided ASC these days. If we've got laryngitis, an internal constraint, you know, we'll write something down, we'll point. So whenever our speech doesn't work for us, we will use an ASC method. Most of the time we use speech because it's very efficient. But when it's not working for us, we'll move to use an ASC mode. And for people with complex communication needs, it's really a matter of degree. The effectiveness of their spoken language, their gesture, more frequently lets them down. Speech alone, gesture alone, is not supporting them to autonomously communicate the message they want more frequently. So it's worth investing in a more sophisticated ASC system than we rely on as speaking people. So everyone actually uses ASC. I think that's an important concept. It also feeds into why it won't stop speech. Speech is extremely efficient. If you can intelligibly and specifically enough you know, communicate using spoken language, it is a very efficient method, which is why ASC will never stop speech. But if you cannot get your message across using spoken language or natural gesture alone, you'll use ASC. We all will. But because it's going to happen more frequently for someone with complex communication needs, let's give them a more sophisticated system that's organized, that's available. Hey, coming back to our arch, the C in the arch stands for competence, communication competence for people who use ASC. And the concepts of this in the ASC literature come a lot from Janice Light and Light and McNaughton and other people along the years. She's been defining communication competence and revisiting communication competence definitions over many years. And of course, we want people to develop more competent communication. And these concepts help us to work out what we need to put in the interventions, what needs to be there to help people develop sufficient knowledge, judgment, and skill in the linguistic competence, the language of the ASC and the environment, to develop operational competence, develop social competence, and to develop strategic competence. So if we're looking at communication competence in some of her later definitions, she also added in psychosocial factors that were critical for people who use ASC to develop more competent communication. So psychosocial factors such as motivation, attitude, confidence, resilience. And in my working life, I've seen this many, many times. I've seen many, many times that people who have better linguistic competence and operational competencies may not be as competent a communicator out there in the world, communicating, living a life using ASC to support their participation. Then people who have this confidence and resilience, if you're an ASC user, you probably need to have that, okay, I have a right to be heard. So we need to intervene not only on the knowledge, judgment and skills, but in a way that builds motivation and attitude, confidence and resilience. Those psychosocial factors of a belief in oneself and a positive attitude to being a person who uses ASE, that the message, the content is more important than the form. What we want to hear is from you, from your autonomous message, rather than the sort of, I suppose, a little bit ableist speaking person view of valuing just the form. And the last one is the H, the habits to support autonomous communication. And these habits are routinely ensuring the ASC system, an aided language system, is readily available for use all the time. So you're prepared for communication at any time. The reality is, if you use a communication aid, a communication displays, book, electronic device, you can't communicate unless it's physically with you. It's not really a communication system if it's not there. And so we have to have habits so that you're carrying it everywhere, that you've got it with you in case you've got something to say. Accepting that we can't know when someone will have an autonomous message. And it's also the habits in those interaction patterns that provide enough time for the person to communicate their own message in the manner and the words they prefer. So it's also about the style of interactions that doesn't continuously use our faster speed of speech to steal their terms by asking questions. It might take a little time to generate, think, initiate, communicate your autonomous message. How do you have that time if someone's always jumping in, asking a question? Do you want this? Do you want this? Do you want this? Do you want this? Let's just want this one, this one. If they're always offering choices or asking questions, how do you have the time to communicate for yourself in your own words? So it's that style of interaction that goes into a different time to slow down our speed a little bit, to have sufficient motivation as partners to prioritize that person's communication efficiency. We're not used to the silences, so we have to develop some habits to be comfortable with that time. Putting it all together.
I am feeling happy and excited. Okay.
Adam, use categories.
You don't understand that? Let's go to here. Places. Right. Let's get ourselves organised there. It's all a bit of a dip because it's running late. So here we go. Right, sit down. Sit down. Places. You're happy and excited. I am going to the page. Supermarket. Right, so here we go. This is our running shopping list. Right. Activities. On the page. On the page. List. On the page. On a big list. Okay, magazine. Let's go back. Let's go back. Not. Okay, magazine today.
So, reflecting on our arch, autonomy, accessibility, communication requirements, competencies and habits for communication at any time. So, in their classroom, they were getting ready to go out shopping for their materials for the class activity. There was a list of materials we need for our class activities. He is trying to express the communication function requirement of manipulate one's teacher. Manipulate one's teacher to add his magazine choice onto that list. It's autonomous, his autonomous message coming from him. He's accessible, his partner interacted with him in a way that allowed him, provided him with the time to speak. His communication requirements, as I said, to manipulate. It was intelligible. It was specific enough. You saw him use multiple modalities. You saw him point to the piece of paper. He didn't have to say shopping lift. It was right there, using multiple modalities. Building his competencies and habits for communication at any time. So we need to consider how all of those come together and look and evaluate, is that an outcome? Probably not the end of the journey, he's still a young person, but working to evaluate what we see, the effects of our intervention against the arch. So we can use the arch to evaluate assessment and intervention. I don't think that anybody has issues with these concepts. But sometimes we have concepts and beliefs, but then we intervene in a way that does not reflect those. So what I want us to do is use these complex concepts to evaluate what we do. I'm going to go through a couple of issues, considerations for ASE. The first one is acknowledging the catch-22 in ASE. We can't determine the child's true level of functioning because of the child's lack of a reliable mean of communication. And we can't plan viable communication intervention because of a lack of data regarding the true level of functioning. We're in this catch-22. They don't have a way of communicating, so how can we work out what they need? In this process, we need to remember that assessment is the observation of a motor response to a sensory input. And that there are multiple skills in every task. So the assessment task may say communication, receptive language, cognitive, but within everything we do, there's sensory, there's motor, there's cognitive, social, emotional, and when there's two or more people around, communication and language. So what are we actually assessing? If we can, in cognitive and language assessment, we cannot actually see cognition and language processing. We infer them from a person's particular movement response to carefully selected sensory inputs. We can only see movement. And what affects what we see? Same children. Typically, lost a photo. Don't know where it is. Typically, as partners in early childhood development, we look for eye gaze, facial expression, gesture, and actions in the environment to signal that child's understanding, and their interest. And we naturally interpret and expand these behaviours using language. If that individual has different sensory processing, movement, and early communication behaviours, that can influence the input we naturally provide. So that when people have sensory motor challenges, these movement challenges will affect their ability to produce body movements, facial expression, gesture, etc. Sensory processing challenges may lead to very different behaviours like sensory seeking, repetitive, reduced eye-hand coordination, where someone sequentially looks and then points. Challenges with motor planning, vision, reduced use eye gaze. Now, if an individual has sensory motor challenges, the things we look for to signal understanding and interest, the things we look for and expand with language, can be different. And they'll have difficulty spontaneously developing and using typical gestural communication, so they'll need to be taught or learn different communication behaviours and movements. As John Costello says, we can't just sit around and wait for a spontaneous combustion of skill. For these individuals with severe multiple challenges, variability is typical and expected. All of the conditions, all of the scaffolds, the variables need to be in place for that person to perform. They're juggling everything. They're juggling sitting on the chair. They're juggling keeping their head upright against gravity. They're juggling where is my body in space. They're juggling internal states, gastro reflux, epilepsy, a whole variety of factors that they are juggling. And so it's only at that moment where they can put all of it together that you see their cognition, their understanding. It's looking at those moments when they can put it all together. And when they can't put it all together, even though the assessment task said it was a cognitive task or receptive language task, the reason they couldn't perform it might be motor, sensory, rather than their cognition. Remember, we cannot see cognition and receptive language. We only infer it. So, the person may be juggling it all and doing it okay, and then their bottom slips forward in the chair. There's a noise that distracts them, and it all falls apart. So they're juggling a lot of things. Every element is challenging. And for people with complex communication needs, the communication that's naturally available in the environment may not be easily accessible. The gesture, the spoken language, by definition, trouble with spoken language. And there may be sparse, if any, examples of competent use of ASC modes they could potentially use. Vygotsky talked about the understanding of past experience. He said that when we do assessments where the examiner does not actively intervene, it only tells you about your past history, what you've had the opportunity to learn up until now, your present functioning, what you've learned to do up until now, not your potential for learning. And we cannot assess something the individual has never had the opportunity to learn. And so where do we begin? Vygotsky talks about the zone of proximal development, where what the person can do by themselves tells you about their past history and present functioning. But that if you intervene with the person, you see that they can do once you've intervened. This zone of proximal development tells you where learning can occur, where their potential is. And this zone is jointly determined by the skills of the individual and the form of structured guidance provided by the skilled partner. And so in ASC, we need to do dynamic assessments. Here, we provide models, cues, instructions, prompts, and feedback during interactions with the person. We actually have to intervene in order to do the assessment. And this tells us more about their potential for learning, factors which influence success or failures, strategies that may facilitate developmental functioning. In ASC, we need to remember that the message of language communication that the person could potentially learn do not naturally exist in the environment. So they can never lead us. They can not spontaneously uptake something that's not there. You know, they can't spontaneously begin to use sign language if no one else is using sign language. They can't spontaneously begin to use a communication aid if there's none there, or if there's one there but they've never seen it used. So professionals have to intervene and provide the aided language or sign language based on their expectations of what's possible. So if that person in their undergraduate course or in their experience thinks it's possible for kids like this to learn 2 symbols, that's what they're going to do. They're going to put 2 symbols there, maybe more, and finish. And then the person can only demonstrate their ability to use what has been set up. So if we thought they could use 2, the most they can use is 2. And whether they use those 2 could be influenced by a variety of factors. So maybe they've got different movements. The partner, how are they going to indicate that symbol? Does the partner understand them when they're trying to indicate that symbol? Or is their movement distracting the partner? So then we can only be influenced by a person's use of what has been set up to use. So we end up with these circular problems. Because ASC modes do not inherently available in the environment, we intervene, provide ASC based on what we think is possible. They can only demonstrate what we've already set up. So that in turn feedbacks and tells us this is all they can do. So we end up in these circular expectations where we see what we expected to see, and our current knowledge is based on what we've previously tried. I think it's really critical that we understand these expectations, that we give people an opportunity to learn the ASC language forms, to acknowledge we actually can't know anything about someone's cognition until we've taught them or attempted to teach them a way of communicating. And there are a lot of beliefs, myths and legends in ASC that are based on the history. You know, what have we seen before? That catch-22, those circular expectations. But also getting stuck on developmental pathways that are based on neurotypical children, where we see things as precursors and we have assumptions about what's easier and harder. But for individuals who have complex communication needs, and particularly the individuals who have sensory and motor movement challenges, their development is different. It's not delayed. What's easier for them, what's harder for them, can be based on their neurological differences rather than the developmental processes outlined. So, for example, an individual with severe spastic quadriplegia and a vision impairment is not going to be able to demonstrate gestural communication. They're not going to be able to demonstrate through actions on the environment, their facial expression, their eye contact. The only way for us to have any idea as to their understanding and their potential for communication is to intervene and teach them movements that they can use to access an ASC system. Provide them opportunities to learn alternative methods. You know, maybe learning to use a scanning system where with one or two movements they can accept, reject items during scanning. So we need to know that that may be easier. Using language may be easier for them than using gestural communication. We also need to acknowledge that language is learned. We're typically immersed from birth in a rich environment of language users. You know, those people are demonstrating pragmatics, the semantics, the syntax of the language. They're interacting directly with the individual, talking to others from the media, from the community. You know, for them, the language that other people use is the language that they're learning in typical development. But for a child learning aided symbols, often what has been the case is people just speak to them. And then somehow they're supposed to output in aided language, having never seen anyone else do it. They're going to have to do that translation themselves. What they really need is other people to use aided language to talk to them. Aided language, spoken language, maybe sign language. So whatever language modalities they might be learning to output, they need to experience how they are learned. So when someone says your child needs to learn to communicate using ASC, interaction will continue to be critical for communication and language development. Family and friends will continue to be the critical influence on the child's communication and language development. However, these interactions will now also need to incorporate the use of alternative forms of communication. So, the ASC literature has now got a range of research studies that show that interventions where others model the individual's ASC system is an effective strategy to support individuals to learn to use their ASC systems. Range of individuals with a range of diagnoses. The article by Sennett et al. Is a systematic review of some of those interventions. But Sennett notes that these interventions that include modelling actually do have some distinct features. So we know it's a good strategy to use, but what are the distinct features? What are the distinct features of the different strategies? They differentiate ASC modelling, where the partner uses the ASC system in the context of naturalistic communication interactions, with instructional modelling, where the teacher models an instructional target. So there are different types of models, and this is very important for us to understand in the context of the arch. There's general receptive input, where partners are interacting with the individual using the ASC system to communicate a variety of genuine messages. It's in natural context. It's a genuine interaction. It's immersion-like. I'm reluctant to actually call it immersion because we never, even with the best efforts, quite recreate the intensity, the amount of input that is given to speaking children in their language. But we need to differentiate between this immersion-like use of ASC by partners and modelling as a prompt or cue. If we look at modelling as a prompt or cue, we can have a situation where another person models a possible message turn in a natural situation. So there's an opportunity, but no expectation that the person will produce that modelled message at that time. So, for example, we may have a display that we're using during mealtime, and this might be me saying, oh, I want some more, and then I take some more and I eat it. It's a genuine message where the partner is actually, oh, I want some more, and they get some more. Versus a model of a targeted message turn in a set-up situation. Here, there's an expectation that the person will produce that specific message. The model is a prompt to get them to say it. Often we have a target in mind. So I'm trying to get them to say more. So, you know, I'll break up the biscuit into 6 pieces and I'll give them a bit, and then I'll go, more? I don't need any more. More? I'm cueing them. Point to more and you'll get some more. Does that? More? And then we have a manned model where we're actually saying say more in order to get it. And they're expected to imitate the model. The reality is that if you want to develop autonomous communication, you cannot spend too much time in your intervention below the red line. Below the red line, the message is the targeted message turn from the partner. It's not their autonomous message. Now, all parents do manned models. Say please. Tell grandma. But you cannot make, if you use strategies below the line where we target a specific word that you're supposed to say at this particular time, then they will learn to perform to our target. They won't learn how to autonomously communicate, to express their own thoughts and ideas, and they may not understand that augmentative and alternative communication can be used for those purposes. Goosen's Crane and Elder, I learned that use the term from them, aided language stimulation, and that is because their intervention includes more than just modelling. It's the system design, engineering the environment with aided symbols. Goosen's Crane and Elder use multiple activity-specific displays placed in the environment, but basically you could use other tools and technique, making sure the aided symbols are available. Feeds into the habits for communication at any time. Then you've got other people modelling it, or I prefer perhaps these days to say interacting using ASE. And they also have strategies to stimulate self-initiated generative use. If we're really creating an aided language learning environment, we're trying to recreate the type of environment that children get with general language stimulation for their first language. It's vocabulary available to communicate at any time. People using aided language systems to interact in natural context, and training the partners to use the ASE systems to interact in natural context and support ASE habits for autonomous communication. Being prepared for communication at any time, the autonomy to communicate according to my own intentions, the right to choose when to communicate or not. So you need the ASE system available for communication at any time, which can also mean engineering the environment with the personal, robust language communication system. So vocabulary is always with the person, the habits for communication at any time, and making sure that every single person had a way to initiate communication when they have something to say. And these solutions are both electronic and non-electronic ASC systems. It's not a choice, it's both. For autonomous communication at any time. You cannot rely on an electronic system only for communication at any time. Everybody has to be able to answer the question, what are you going to do when the power goes out? How are you going to communicate when your device is attached to the wall, being charged? For individuals with physical challenges, often they may need to be in their very supportive position in order to access the electronic device, to use switch scanning or have a very specific position for an eye gaze device. The environment is full of, wet areas, bright sunlight, making the screen not work. So you must be able to have a non-electronic method of communication for communication at any time. And we're going to be looking at creating that aided language learning environment, making sure it's available, but also recreating those environments that typical children are immersed in. So typically children are immersed in their spoken language. They learn language while they're busy doing other things. We don't teach the first language. They learn it. They're surrounded. People talk to them. People talk to other people in their presence. The television talks. They're surrounded. As a speech pathologist with language therapy, we're taught, read books and play games. Yeah, but that's not where you learn your base communication. You learn your basic communication, living the life, where mum say, hurry up, we need to get in the car. What have you done there? All of the different messages that are happening while we're busy living life doing other things. For most children, that's enough. Living in the world where other people are using their first language is enough. They develop this complex language system of their spoken language without anyone teaching a thing. For some kids, they have a bit more trouble. They get sent to speech therapy. They might have speech or language challenges and they need therapy. And what we do as therapists is we pull structures out of the background and we focus and we practice. And it's easy to think that the change happened here, but it didn't. Because these individuals came from an environment where they were immersed in the spoken language and they went back into an environment to practice and learn the pragmatics in the real world, to learn how to use it, to experience its use. Sometimes what happens for kids that use ASC is that we apply the same service delivery model of therapy for children who have complex communication needs. But here, if this is the only place that you experience the aided language using, it's unusual pragmatics. Where else in the world is there someone waiting on you desperately to say something? Where else in the world is there someone creating a target for you? And these kids, they come from a world where nobody uses it and they go back into a world where people only use spoken language. And they don't have the opportunity to learn how they can use ASC, the pragmatics of using ASC in the real world. So what we're actually needing to do is to start with creating the aided language learning environment. So our first intervention is not providing direct therapy to that child, to that individual. It's about supporting their social network, their partners to use ASC. And if we do that, sometimes they'll never need to come to speech language therapy They'll just develop it as per the other kids if we do a good enough job here. Of course, there are other kids who like kids with spoken language. Eventually, later, they might need some language therapy, but that's not where we start. There's a difference between language therapy and creating an aided language learning environment. This is Kim. When she was 13 years of age, she was preparing to write a speech at the opening of our CPEC's final building. We got a proper building, and she came up to me and she asked me, okay, what do they want me to talk about? And I said, oh, look, lots of people have donated money for the building, and but they don't know a lot about what we do, so it'd be really nice if you talked about what CPEC had taught her to do. And so she started brainstorming and putting together a whole list of things that CPEC had taught her to do, lots of movement things, lots of other things, but communication was nowhere in there. Now, I had created whole communication systems using alternative access for this young lady. And whilst I normally don't interfere with people's speeches, I couldn't help myself. I said, what about communication? And she said, no one taught me to communicate. I just learned it. And that's the reality we're working for. We created an aided language learning environment for her, and she learned to communicate. So what we're aiming to do is create environments where people can see their system of communication used interactively by other people to communicate real messages in real situations, interacting with them, interacting with others in their presence, range of purposes, messages and topics. Have multiple opportunities to practice communicating real messages in real situations with appropriate scaffolds, with the partner helping, everybody focused on understanding each other. Get natural feedback as to the effectiveness of their communication. Responding to everything without question. Early learning, maybe from babble. We don't know for sure. In typical spoken language development, babbling is an important developmental process where we say, oh, you want some more? And they go, oh, no. Yes, you do. You're liking this. We have these conversations with babble that help develop conversational turn-taking, joint attention, shared meaning, give them feedback to let them know that speech has meaning, sound has meaning to you. Children who use AC may need those similar experiences. If you don't understand, you say so. Sorry, I don't know. Giving them feedback. And have their informal communication and their language messages expanded by other people using modes of communication they will be able to use to communicate more effectively. We develop a lot of our syntax by people expanding our single words into 2 words. Develop our language meanings, we point and the partner says, oh, you want a drink? But instead of just doing that verbally, we need to do that using the AAC language system. And we need to help people problem solve how they can do this in the mess of the real world. Indicating the symbols, what helps the individual to attend to communication. What access method are they learning to use? We're going to have to use the alternative access technique the individuals are learning in order to specifically model how they can indicate the symbols on their display. If that person needs to use a scanning method or an eye gaze method or alternative access method, and all we do is point, they might think that would be useful. Shame I can't point. We have to give them that concept. Hey, I could do that. And we're modeling more than this pictograph means this. If we want autonomous, self-initiative, generative communication, in addition to learning the language, of the ASC system, the individual will need the knowledge, judgment, and skill to generate ideas of what to say, to initiate communication within the discourse of their daily life, to introduce their own messages and topics, to solve problems, to have an idea how they could select items. And we need to, most importantly, help partners learn to interact using ASC. They have to have some opportunities to develop fluency to use the ASC system. Well, you can't just give someone a tool and expect them to use it. We have to have training sessions to help them learn and practice the patterns that are used within the individual's ASC system and language organisation. And there's graded expectations to develop that fluency so it doesn't feel overwhelming. You have the whole system there with you for communication at any time. But you say you don't have to use everything right now to the adult partners. You start with one pattern. Choose frequently occurring messages you can use throughout the day. The way you develop fluency, which is automaticity with anything, is saying similar types of messages. Okay? Opinions are really good to do early on because you can think up an opinion when you remember to use the system. But you saying similar types of things helps to develop that automaticity for fluency. But then add another pattern and another pattern. And that practice builds fluency. The guided practice to develop competent use, help them learn by modelling and coaching in the mess of the real world. Have to be very careful that what we professionals leave families and teachers and other people images of isn't that to use ASC you need to sit down for an hour and talk non-stop and play games. If that's how we model using it, that's how they'll try to use it, but that doesn't happen very often in their daily life. That's not how communication happens at home or in the classroom. How it happens is people say things and then they leave. They say things and they leave. And the world is messy. So we have to model and coach in that mess to help them see how they can do it, giving them practical ideas and support for juggling it all. In terms of how much ASC, there's two main developmental parts for aided language acquisition that are based on whether you understand spoken language. The first is based on a comprehension of speech, similar to second language learning. So if you understand the spoken word more, you already have a concept of moreness. So when someone holds up a symbol and says more, you can fast map everything you already understand of moreness onto that symbol. So you can begin to use it faster because you already have a concept of moreness. If you have very limited or no comprehension of spoken language, you have to acquire the communication system without reference to speech. You have to create the meaning system in the ASC language forms. They don't have a pre-existing concept of moreness. So when you're at a mealtime and holding up more, they might map a whole heap of different meanings on that as they do a little hypothesis. They might map the word eat on it. Spoon, open your mouth, something to do with eating. If that's the only place they see more, they can make that error. And it's only by seeing that word more used in other situations where there's no spoon, food, or opening your mouth, that all of a sudden they, hang on a minute, it must mean something else. So if you do not currently have an existing language, you are going to have to create the meaning system in the alternative form, similar to first language learning. And these individuals need others to use a range of aided and ASE modes to support their understanding, to help them feel safe and secure in the world that they understand others. They need additional vocabulary for others to use to support understanding and language learning. They'll need a lot more models of ASC use prior to them using it expressively. The first signs you'll look for in intervention is growing understanding, reducing behaviours of concern, increased participation, joint attention. You'll be looking for their understanding of language first before you're looking for expressive use. Because of their limited pre-existing understanding of language, they're unable to just fast map a symbol onto a pre-existing meaning. They're unable to recode meaning. They're learning it like a first language. So we need to support receptive language without adding too much complexity to the ASC space for the individual. When we're looking at the arch and vocabulary selection and organisation, how does that affect ASC system design? Well, one is that when we're looking at selecting vocabulary, a child who uses speech will independently select the words she wishes to use from the vast array of words she hears and sees used every day. A child who uses ASC will independently select the words she wishes to use from the vocabulary other people have chosen to model and from aided symbols made available for her to use. We have to make words available in the aided language systems for them to select the words they want to use. They can't choose a word that's not there. So we have to remember that we're providing vocabulary to create an aided language learning environment for learning and use. Partners to model, individuals to use, range of movements throughout the day, range of functional purposes to stimulate that language development and enable them to meet their varied communication requirements. In terms of vocabulary selection, Buchan and Miranda have a lovely chapter on message selection, on vocabulary selection. One of the things they point out is that people who speak are very, very bad at pre-selecting vocabulary. We don't need to think what words we need to use ahead of time. We just go into a situation, burble out. You know, maybe sometimes we plan messages, like if we're going to the doctor or we're doing a job interview, but then we go and just say whatever we were going to say anyway. You know, the plan doesn't always be executed exactly how we thought. If you set a group of people around a table and ask them to select vocabulary for someone else to use, they're really bad at it. So we need some strategies to help us, and there's a range of different types of vocabulary. There's coverage vocabulary, which is the vocabulary that covers our daily life needs. So the places we go, the things we do, the people we, that covers things we do. We can also think of vocabulary in terms of developmental vocabulary, often, how vocabulary develops, syntax, grammatics, all of those developmental aspects. We can look at it in terms of frequency of use, in terms of how frequent is that particular word used. This comes to core and fringe or extended vocabulary. And then we can look at vocabulary in terms of conversation. What words do we need for greetings, for small talk, for narration, for procedural descriptions, context-specific conversations, wrap-up remarks and farewell statements. So these are some of the ways we can look at vocabulary. For those who are less aware, core vocabulary, the frequency of use of vocabulary, is very much talked about in ASC in the last decade or so. So core vocabulary is frequently used across contexts. It's vocabulary need throughout life. Approximately 70 to 80% of what we say uses the same 200 core words. So these are the words that are in lots of sentences, regardless of what you're talking about. So in English, it's, I and am and is and at and And then, these words are in multiple sentences, range of topics, range of different meanings. And we all have common core and we have some individual core. So someone might have a tendency to go, well, actually, frequently. And so that's in their individual core as well. However, if we look at it from a developmental perspective, and if we look at the top 10 first words, these frequently used in adult sentences, words, are not always the first words that kids use. And Bloom suggests that in those first words, there's 3 main principles. One is relevance. It's relevant to your current interests. Discrepancy. It enables you to describe events not known or evident to the listener. Okay, so some of the core vocabulary is more easily guessable. It allows elaboration as children's mental representations expand, need words to express complexity of ideas that are represented. So if we look also not just at core and frequency of use, we need to look at a development. What are the core words or the frequently used words in development? If we look at the effect of the development of semantics and system, the core vocabulary, you have to go now. One word would be go. I can do it. Me. I see a dog. The one word utterance would be dog. You will do it. You. I will not do it. No. What is that? That. The lawnmower is on. Lawnmower. So in those single words, what's of interest to that individual? What's the key element that's getting the key meaningful part across? And if we look at development, we have to make sure that we have vocabulary that allows us to communicate for all of those early purposes that people communicate for. We have to make sure that our initial systems let you communicate for a full range of purposes, because we don't know that person's personality until they start to communicate. When we introduce communication systems to our young kids, in a group of 10, 12, 1 to 2 year olds coming into a group at CPAC, some of them will be all about the I wants, and some will all be about the complaints, and some will all about, which first words they use is variable. And if we're looking at autonomy, we have to have sufficient vocabulary for them to express a range of purposes so they can select the words they want to use. We don't get to identify which function. They do. Because it's about them expressing themselves autonomously. And if we look at, the psychosocial factors in communication competence, we need to make sure that we've got varied vocabulary and messages so the person can express themselves. So, young woman I worked with when she was 11, she had quite developed sentence structure and word morphology, use an electronic and a non-electronic communication system. And when she was 11, her goal was to be more interesting. She recognized that varied vocabulary and messages were going to be very important for her to express her personality and style, but also this concept of relatedness. She was about to start a local secondary school, and she recognized that she would need to be more interesting with her word choice to attract the friendship groups that she wanted. So it's not just about core. The reality is we need both core and content. If we're in classrooms and we're discussing going to Australia, you can just say, I want to go there with the core words, and it'll be fine. but you go home after school and you say, I want to go there. And your family have no idea that you've been studying Australia. They have no idea, and they'll start guessing about, do you want to go to the shops? Do you want to go to the movies? You're going to need the word Australia. The reality is you cannot introduce your own topic with just core vocabulary. So you need both core and content, and we want to look at the more efficient vocabulary organization. How do we do this? We need fast access to core vocabulary for use within context on an established topic. When we know what we're talking about, we know we're talking about going to the movies, you can say, can I come? Just with the core vocabulary. If someone else has introduced the topic of movies, yeah. So fast access for that core vocabulary. And fast access to core vocabulary organized to combine with more content words for multiple messages. And we need content vocabulary to express a range of messages, to express our personality, to introduce a topic. Okay. The pragmatic approach to vocabulary organization, the way I do it is that I use a whole variety, all types of vocabulary selection. My concept is vocabulary for autonomous communication, so we are not defining which words you are going to use now and which words you're going to learn now. I provide a range of developmentally appropriate for all the pragmatic functions and have a system that develops more specific language over time. There's strategies to collect vocabulary during interactive communication. While partners are very, very poor at sitting around a table predicting what words they need, they're very, very good at complaining when words are missing. So you need strategies where they can add them into the system when they find a word that's missing, so that the system is always getting more and more personal. And it also considers multimodal communication. So the aided language form is different from spoken language. One of the elements is you cannot produce actions and gesture at the same time as you say a word. You have to do it sequentially. And so this alters which modality you might use for some words, particularly in early development. So, for example, in English, the word that is an early acquired word. That is a core vocabulary word. But in early language, it's used always with the point. That. The meaning is actually in the point. So if you're using aided language, you would probably multimodal that and just do the point with a vocal, if you can get the vocal as well, rather than giving a pictograph word for that. However, as language developments, you start to use the pronoun that to stand, in conversation on an established topic. You then need the pictograph for it then. Is it voice output? In a non-electronic pod communication book, the word hello is not there because people have to come and read the label on a communication book. They've usually said hello. Much more efficient to teach someone to go, wave, a look, a smile, vocal, hello. However, it is in the pod page that's for electronic communication because you can yell hello across a room with a voice output aid. So they're just some of the examples of influencing by the aided language form. You need to, in the vocabulary organization, accommodation for differences in aided form. Okay. What works electronically, what works non-electronically. And aiming always to have a similarity, transparency between the two systems to support ease of use and learning. Always in any system, consider how the vocabulary organization supports the arch. There is a handout on Linda Burkhart's website. You can see down the bottom that actually discusses ASC system design for more efficient autonomous communication at any time. So if someone wants to follow that up. When considering the range of approaches to vocabulary selection and organisation, remember the purpose of ASC: to enable the individual to autonomously communicate all of their varied communication requirements. We're combining multiple approaches. Vocabulary selection and organisation are needed to enable the individual to efficiently select the words they require to say what I want to say to whoever I want to say it to, wherever, whenever I want to say it, however I choose to say it. So how did I learn to communicate? Aided language stimulation during genuine interactions, multiple partners, multiple environment, robust language system, and development over time. Always making sure that there is a plan in the ASC system from the first words through to full language development. And remembering that, as Light and McNaughton tell us, communication is not in itself an end goal. It's rather a tool to allow individuals to participate effectively to gain their goals at home, at school, at work, or in the community. That ultimately the goals of ASC intervention must be that the children and adults with complex communication needs have the opportunity to live happy and fulfilled life, where they're able to participate fully in education, employment, family, and community life, where they are safe and secure, have access to needed services, where they are respected and valued for who they are, where they have a chance to develop friendships and intimate relationships, and when they have the opportunity to make meaningful contributions to society. You know, it's really, all of the work we do is really only meaningful if it's used for these purposes. I'd just like to share a couple of outcomes.
Through my all life, I've been able to talk because I always had to dine a voice and communication book. I can do it by myself, but I feel like I am the same as them. They talk to me like an adult and not like a child.
Also remembering that often individuals use their ASC communication systems to both speak and write. Okay.
My name is Sally Brenda, and I am 21 years old. I have cerebral palsy and I am deaf. I use an iPad for all my communication, but I can read sometimes and also know sign language. Because I'm deaf, I prefer people to type at the iPad so that I can read it and then answer back. Now I am working at Cerebral Palsy Education Centre as a speech pathology assistant programmer in the box, making communication books, using board matter and teaching new speech pathology students how to program devices. I am also going to TAP to study for photo imaging and design. Some of the things I like doing is going to the gym because it keeps me fit and healthy, going out with my friends, getting dressed up and just having a good time. I also like shopping for clothes.
So, if we want to achieve long-term outcomes where people have complex communication needs, can use ASC to live a life, to do what they want to do, to be independent. And in independent, I mean autonomous as well as operationally independent. Then it helps to have a plan from the beginning, to have a concept of where you want to go. And I hope that you can use these concepts, to reflect on these concepts as we continue throughout the conference.
Eu espero que todo mundo tenha gostado muito, tanto quanto eu gostei de ter gravado essa sessão com a Gayle, de ter feito essas legendas. Eu queria que vocês dessem as boas-vindas. A Gayle está aqui. Welcome, Gayle. Thank you so much for being so generous with your presentation. Eu já recebi uma pergunta pelo nosso chat. Eu vou ler a primeira pergunta. Gail, I'm gonna read you the first question. I'm gonna read it first in Portuguese and then in English. Não sei se já é o momento. Peraí, não. Natália, não, tem uma outra antes, só um minuto. Gail, eu sou uma grande fã sua. Obrigado por falar sobre comunicação autônoma. Gostaria de saber qual hierarquia de dicas você acha mais adequada. Qual dica é mais adequada e qual é a mais intrusiva? Vejo pessoas treinando a comunicação e tenho muito medo de não desenvolvermos uma comunicação autônoma. So, Gail, I'm a big fan. It's a question from Natalia Bertolotto. Thank you for speaking about autonomous communication. I would like to know which prompt hierarchy do you think it's more appropriate? Which prompt would be more adequate and which would be more intrusive? I see a lot of people training communication, and I am afraid that we're not developing autonomous communication. Your mic is off. You're muted. Oh, okay. I can unmute you. Just a sec. See if it works now.
Unmuted. Okay. Multimodal communication worked. It's hard to answer a question like that because it's hard to completely understand what someone has in their mind as a prompt hierarchy. Sometimes people use that term from a behavioral perspective where I give you this prompt and that the other prompt.
Let me translate this and you can keep going. É difícil responder essa pergunta sem saber exatamente do que a pessoa está falando. Às vezes ela está falando de uma visão do lado comportamental, em que você fala de uma dica, depois outra dica naquela escala do behaviorismo. Go on.
We don't do that because that is breaking the autonomy lines. Because if we have an agenda, if we have an identified goal, then it's our message we're prompting them to say.
A gente não faz isso porque se a gente faz isso, a gente não está construindo comunicação autônoma. A gente está dizendo para eles qual é a mensagem que eles devem dizer. Ok.
Another way looking at prompting is taking into consideration pragmatics. And it's using prompts and cues from a hierarchy point of view. It's how much does it mess with the pragmatics of the turn. This concept came from Goossens, Crane and Elder and has been modified and adapted over the years by myself. So if that's what we're talking about, that's different.
Ok. Outra forma de olhar é olhar pela pragmática. Foi um conceito que veio de Goossens, Elder and Crane e adaptado pela Gail. Go on.
Yeah. The most important thing to remember is that every time you prompt, you mess with the turn. And so the person may be cued to communicate by the prompt, not the natural turn.
Então, toda vez que você usa uma dica, um prompt, você atrapalha o turno. E aí a pessoa pode ser levada a comunicar pelo prompt, pela dica, e não por essa troca de turno. Ok.
So, in terms of creating an aided language learning environment, you use 0 prompts until you have given a person who understands speech at least 1 year of receptive input. And I mean proper aided language learning, not owning, but using.
Ok. Então, de uma perspectiva da linguagem assistida natural, da estimulação de linguagem assistida natural no ambiente, a gente dá 0 dicas. Até que a gente tenha dado para uma pessoa que entende o sistema de linguagem dela por pelo menos 1 ano. Ok. Love it.
If the person doesn't understand spoken language, you have to make sure they're understanding the aided language symbols before you use any prompts for expression.
E para uma pessoa que não entende linguagem falada, você tem que ter certeza de que ela já está entendendo os símbolos adaptados, né, os símbolos apoiados, antes de começar a usar qualquer tipo de prompt ou dica.
Talking about prompts and cues would be a whole other hour and a half lecture. So the main thing is that you have to be very careful not to make what you're prompting pragmatically incorrect. You're not changing the tune.
Então, você tem que ter certeza de que quando você está usando prompt ou dica, que você não está atrapalhando com a pragmática ou com essa troca de turno.
So sometimes people think that they're supporting someone to give an opinion. But if they've asked a question, what do you think of this? It's no longer an opinion, it's an answer.
Ok. Então, vamos supor, às vezes você acha que você está apoiando a pessoa a dar uma opinião. Mas se você faz uma pergunta, isso deixa de ser uma opinião e passa a ter a função de resposta e não de opinião. Ok.
So that's just an example. So
Ok.
you can read more about it in the pod communication book manuals in English or Portuguese.
And in Português. Você pode ler mais sobre isso no manual do POD, que é distribuído nos cursos. Ok, next question. I'll read it in Portuguese. Não sei se já é o momento, mas queria fazer uma pergunta para a Gayle. Saber se ela pode compartilhar conosco mais alguma dica para aumentar o engajamento e o uso da CA por parte dos pais e responsáveis. Também queria agradecer a Gayle por mudar a vida de tantas pessoas e a minha também. So I would like to ask Gayle if she could share with us more ways that we can engage parents and caregivers to use AAC more. And she also wants to thank you for changing so many lives, including hers.
I think the biggest support for partners is understanding, creating a shared understanding about what AAC is for. Often we jump in with the tools, but they have a different image in their mind about what it's for than us. So
Então, o que ela diz, o que ela acha que é a melhor forma de apoiar parceiros de comunicação é criar um entendimento em comum com esses parceiros, que muitas vezes a gente chega já oferecendo uma ferramenta e esses parceiros têm uma ideia muito diferente do que essa ferramenta representa. Go on.
So these concepts that we've talked about in the arch are really critical understandings to motivate someone to make the sort of changes in their communication to support their child's learning. You want to translate?
Can you repeat? I kind of got lost.
Okay, so the concepts we've been talking about, autonomy, accessibility, meeting those varied communication requirements, habits, competence, multimodal communication, the sorts of concepts we've talked about in this presentation are critical for parents to share. Using ASC is annoying. It's a love-hate relationship.
Yep.
So to change your interaction pattern, you really have to understand why.
Então, esses conceitos todos de autonomia, de acessibilidade, de requisitos para comunicação, de comunicação multimodal, tem que ter um entendimento conjunto, tem que se explicar isso para os pais e parceiros de comunicação, porque usar a comunicação alternativa, a comunicação aumentativa alternativa, usar uma ferramenta é irritante, de certa forma, alguns vão achar que atrapalha, né, nessa conexão, mas se eles entenderem o porquê desse uso para apoiar a comunicação autônoma, apoiar a acessibilidade, apoiar os requisitos de comunicação do indivíduo, eles são mais suscetíveis aí a quererem participar de forma mais ativa. Go on.
So one of the most critical things I've found is helping parents see communication from their child's perspective, rather than their own, what do you want? What's wrong? But to see communication from the child's perspective, the range of functions and purposes, that it's multimodal. And this can take a while, but it's important you share that understanding.
Ok. É importante explicar para os pais, para eles tentarem ver a comunicação da perspectiva da criança, do filho, né? Não só do que eles querem saber, de ficar fazendo pergunta, mas do que essa criança pode querer comunicar, das funções que ela poderia usar. Tentar ver pela perspectiva da pessoa com necessidade complexa de comunicação e não do parceiro. Ela disse que isso pode levar algum tempo ou muito tempo, mas que é importante que eles entendam essa perspectiva e todas esses termos que a gente falou aqui durante essa apresentação, de autonomia, de acessibilidade, de requisitos da comunicação, de hábitos para comunicação, a qualquer momento. Ok.
Different families will be dealing with different complexities and hearing different things at different times. So the other thing is, don't put people on the spot. Just keep being the little engine that could. Model for them how it works. Coach them how it works. Try and do it in the mess of the real world, or recreate situations that are more like the real world so that they could see how they can do it in their environment.
Então, entender que cada família está num momento e tem necessidades diferentes e entendimentos diferentes, e não colocar eles ali na berlinda, tentar entender a posição deles também e modelar para eles, mostrar para eles como deve ser feito e como deve ser feito na bagunça da vida real, né? Não em situações só criadas. Tentar simular a bagunça que é a vida real e como que eles podem estar modelando durante esses momentos.
Parents observing us do a language session where we play a game and talk non-stop for an hour is not something they can immediately relate to as something they can recreate.
Ok. Então, os pais olhando o profissional durante uma sessão, né, uma sessão controlada dentro de um consultório, onde vocês estão jogando um jogo, fazendo uma brincadeira e modelando sem parar, isso não é a realidade dos pais dentro de casa, né? A bagunça da vida real, de atender a vida diária. Então, pensar um pouco nisso também. Tem que modelar dentro da vida real. Ok. I think.
So we have to make sure, regardless of where we can interact, that we can see how communication comes in and out during the day. This is easiest to do if we go into natural environments and not talk non-stop, which is the temptation as a professional model as much as I can in this session. But the parents don't relate to that. We have to go in and say, what do you do now? Okay, I'll hang out with you. See how when you're doing the laundry, you do. And you've set your child up in front of a television so you can do the laundry. You do come through and say something and then move on. They need to see how it happens in the real world.
O ideal é os profissionais irem para dentro da vida diária dessas famílias, né, e mostrar ali nas rotinas diárias como que vocês podem estar, como que essa família pode estar modelando. Então você vai, a mãe vai lavar a roupa, né, ela bota lá a criança para assistir televisão, mas ela entra ali, passa, fala alguma coisa e sai. E é assim que a gente tem que demonstrar a modelagem e não falando o tempo todo, modelando o tempo todo, porque isso é uma ideia irreal que não vai acontecer no dia a dia das famílias.
So always reflect on your practice and think, what is this teaching the child and the family about autonomy and accessibility and meeting varied communication requirements, competencies and habits? How is it helping them learn that arch?
Então, sempre refletir sobre a sua prática, do que isso está ensinando para as pessoas, para as crianças e para as famílias, sobre autonomia, acessibilidade, os requisitos de comunicação, né, atender a esses requisitos de comunicação, a competência e aos hábitos para comunicação a qualquer momento.
I did notice that someone in the chat had told people about the Isaac presentation that they recorded of myself and Linda Burkhart and Melissa that you can access through Isaac.
Quem é associado a Isaac tem acesso a Isaac Internacional. Eu não sei se está disponível para quem não é associado a Isaac, mas na conferência de Cancún, a Gayle fez uma palestra com a Linda Burkhart e a Melissa, e que vale a pena assistir essa palestra, está disponível para compra, se eu não me engano, no site da Isaac Internacional.
So thank you, whoever did that. It's on the hierarchy. It's on What's the Cue, which includes the hierarchy, prompts and cues.
Então, inclui aí a hierarquia de prompts e dicas. Next question. Também quero fazer uma pergunta. Usar os pictogramas na barra de mensagem pode atrapalhar a alfabetização? So, using the pictographs on the message bar, can it interfere with literacy instruction, with literacy development?
No. For some individuals who have difficulty understanding speech, who have graphic symbols as their receptive language, as their first language, you need to have the pictographs in the message window so they can understand. For other children who currently can't read fluently, the pictographs help them look and reflect and see what it is they're putting in the message window, and helps with the development of syntax. People are confusing the comments from the literacy people about don't replace written text with symbols in books. Okay, but remember, the message window is the language of interaction. So no, it does not stop literacy development. Of course, once someone's fairly literate, you can take the symbols off.
Então, não impede o desenvolvimento do letramento para pessoas que, por exemplo, não entendem linguagem falada. É importante que o símbolo esteja ali, porque é a forma de entendimento dela. Para crianças que ainda não estão alfabetizadas, é importante também para que elas entendam o que elas estão colocando na barra de mensagem. E as pessoas, às vezes, confundem o que se fala aí, né, no letramento abrangente, na parte de letramento, de que você não deve simbolizar texto para compreensão, trocar as palavras por símbolos, porque isso não ajuda na compreensão, mas quando você está falando de comunicação, isso não interfere, a gente está falando aí de comunicação. Ok. Another question. Gayle, iniciantes em CAA que apertam muitas vezes o mesmo símbolo, parecendo estar explorando o sistema. Como direcionar para uma comunicação autônoma com significado? Isso é esperado por quanto tempo? Emergent users of AAC who press the same button, same symbol, a lot of times it seems like they're exploring the system, how to redirect them to an autonomous communication with meaning. Is that expected? And for how long should they be doing this and move on to more functional communication?
A tricky question to answer because it may have a whole variety of different underlying reasons that someone is doing this. It may be that someone is not understanding the communicative purpose of the device. If it's a speech device, they may be just using it like a cause and effect. Press the button, make it speak. Press the button, make it speak. Press the button, make it speak. Sort of behavior. In that case, you may find that they will be able to focus on learning communication and language better with a non-electronic system than be distracted by the speech output of an electronic system. They
Ok,
may not.
let me translate.
Yeah.
Então é difícil falar sem saber exatamente o que está por baixo, né, desse comportamento, tem que entender melhor a função desse comportamento. Quando a gente fala de um dispositivo gerador de fala, esse indivíduo pode não ter entendido ainda a função de comunicação desse dispositivo e usar aquilo como um brinquedo de causa e efeito. Eu aperto, ele fala, eu aperto, ele fala, eu aperto, ele fala. Talvez para esse indivíduo seja melhor ir para um sistema de baixa tecnologia, onde não vai ter esse retorno da voz, né, e eles não vão usar dessa forma. Go on.
Okay, so for some individuals, they may not have worked out the communicative purpose of a speech generating device, and they're just making it speak. Yeah.
Então, para alguns indivíduos, eles podem não ter entendido o propósito de comunicação do dispositivo e podem estar usando ele só para fazer ele falar, só como um brinquedo.
So other individuals maybe have worked out it communicates and they're just using a button, any button, to get social closeness.
Então, para alguns indivíduos, eles podem entenderam já a função de comunicação, mas podem estar usando só para chamar atenção, para poder se relacionar com os outros, né? Para criar algum tipo de conexão.
It's like I've learned this gets good reaction.
Eu aprendi que isso me dá uma boa reação dos outros, então eu vou apertar aqui porque vai vir todo mundo, né? Everyone is gonna be, oh my God, he's using it.
Yeah, yeah. The most important thing is that we are providing examples of the communicative use of a range of messages using the system along the way. Yeah.
Então, o mais importante é que a gente vá modelando, né, demonstrando o uso desse sistema para propósitos comunicativos com mensagens, né, reais, situações naturalísticas aí, para que ele entenda a função desse dispositivo.
Whenever we see a behavior, we have to look at more detail into the origins of that behavior. So it varies. You can have the same general piece of information you give me, but it could have a range of different underlying purposes from the individual's point of view.
Então, é importante, quando a gente observa algum tipo de comportamento, a gente tentar entender melhor o que tem por baixo desse comportamento, o que está levando esse indivíduo a se comportar dessa forma, né? Qual é a função desse comportamento. Ok, next question. I won't take too much of your time. We were a little late, and your session was a little bit over. I was not able to cut anything because it was so important. So, I'll probably take, 2 more questions and we're done? Ok. Gente, eu vou fazer mais 2 perguntas. Can I afterwards send you the other questions and you send me an email and maybe I'll just put it on and
I can try.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Gail. Next question. Obrigado por seu compartilhamento. Sou fonoaudióloga e mãe de um menino com necessidades complexas de comunicação. Ele usa um tablet com sistema suplementar, pois sua fala é reduzida e um andador para caminhar. Ele também tem um atraso no desenvolvimento de aprendizagem. Atualmente moro em Portugal, estou tendo dificuldade. Você teria algum argumento ou sabe de algum direito internacional que garanta a essa criança um mediador? Eu vou pular essa pergunta, tá, gente? Porque eu acho que não tem tanto a ver com o que a Gayle falou na palestra dela. Suas ideias sobre prompt cues no site da Isaac Internacional? Não. Tá. Ok. Let me find a good question. Ok. É indicado retirar a barra de mensagem para comunicadores iniciantes? So, talking about speech generating device, I'm assuming. Is it indicated to remove the message bar for emergent communicators?
No.
No.
No. We need a message bar for emergent communicators. One of the big advantages of a speech generating device is the message window, both when we're modeling, in that when we're modeling in a non-electronic, it can be more transient. You can hold it. It's less come and go than speech. But the message bar gives processing time for people to see the message put together. So emergent communicators, absolutely, we want them to see what goes into the message window. We want them to learn that you compile a message and then speak. Do that bit.
Então, numa baixa tecnologia, não tem esse efeito tão transiente da alta tecnologia, onde as coisas vão mudando, né? Então, o símbolo fica ali, você fala e ele ainda está ali, mas quando você está falando de um dispositivo gerador de fala, onde as pranchas vão mudando dinamicamente à medida que você vai apertando, é importante que esse símbolo vá para uma barra de mensagem para que se construa aquela mensagem ali, para que ele entenda essa construção da mensagem. Isso até para comunicadores emergentes. Ok.
Absolutely critical for our most severely involved children, who are more likely to be relying on the graphic symbols for understanding.
E é de extrema importância, principalmente para as pessoas que precisam mais desse apoio do símbolo para entender o que está sendo conversado, o que está sendo falado, né? Então, esse suporte de ter o símbolo na barra de mensagem é de extrema importância para as crianças com questões mais severas que precisam desse suporte.
Also, decades of experience has taught me that the automatic, it just speaking every time you say something, reduces the development of syntax, of sentence structure, because partners respond to each thing they hear and turn each message into one word.
Okay.
So the child says, I want, and they go, what do you want?
Okay.
Before you have the time to put the next word. Yeah.
Então, outra coisa que ela está explicando é que a função de falar na entrada, quando você aperta o botão e ele fala, isso também reduz a formação de sintaxe, porque geralmente o parceiro responde a cada botão que a criança aperta, né? Então, se a criança vai lá e apertou, eu quero, e aí imediatamente o parceiro responde, o que você quer, antes que a criança consiga compor uma frase, né? Então, essa função também pode atrapalhar aí na composição de sintaxe.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
There's a real thing in ASE because of the speed. When have I finished my message? When is it your turn?
Okay.
And
Então,
partners steal turns all the time.
os parceiros roubam o turno da pessoa que usa CA o tempo todo, né? Então, para que eles consigam compor a frase, e aí sim ter essa troca de turno, né? Quando fala na entrada, os parceiros acabam roubando esse turno do indivíduo.
And helpful partners are the worst.
Os parceiros que tentam ajudar demais são os piores.
The child says, look. And the partner goes, what do you want me to look at? You want me to look at this? You want me to look at this? You want me to look at that? And they go into guessy before the child has a chance to
Say something else.
put. Yeah.
Então, aquele parceiro que quando a criança fala, olha, e aí o parceiro já está, olha o quê? Olha ali, olha aqui, olha lá, né? Ele acaba não deixando a criança desenvolver e completar essa mensagem. Okay, there is a question about pod.
Yeah.
É indicado progredir no sistema de comunicação aos poucos, aumentando grades e quantidade de imagens. Exemplo, começar com pod 12, em 6 meses aumentar para o pod, eu vou supor que é o 16, seguindo em 4 meses para pod 20, e assim por diante, até chegar nos mais avançados, de 70. So, is it indicated to progress on a communication system a little bit of a time at a time, like increasing the number of symbols in each screen? Let's say start with the pod 12. In 6 months, you move on to a pod 16. In 6 months, you move on to a pod 20, and so on until you reach, a pod 70.
No, we always are looking at your current function. So people can jump, they don't have to move through that. You need to read the accompanying information files to see what does the child need. Okay, so the pod 12, 16, 20 all use pragmatic branch starters. So if which are only need in the obligatory pathway. So they are only needed by people who are currently not able to put together 3, 4 words. Once you can put together 3, 4, 5 word sentences, you don't need them. So if on a 12 someone is putting together multiple words together, you can jump past to a keyword book that doesn't have pragmatic branch starters.
Okay.
So it's
Não,
reading there. Yeah.
Não é nível a nível, você não tem que passar por todos os livros, é de acordo com a função presente da criança, tem que ler o que acompanha lá, a explicação da linguagem que tem dentro de cada livro, né? Mas a partir do momento que a criança começa num livro com os ramos pragmáticos e ela já está botando 3, 4, 5 símbolos juntos, ela pode pular direto para um livro de palavras-chave expandidas, como 40 ou até 70 símbolos por página. Não é de um nível para o outro. I'll just do one last question, Gail, please.
Just to clarify that
Mm-hmm.
Last question. The cue you need more language is that you can no longer expand the sentence without changing sections. That's the cue that you need a book with more predictably associated vocabulary, more vocabulary.
Então, a dica, o que você deve procurar aí para saber se você precisa de um livro mais avançado é se você não consegue mais expandir a mensagem sem precisar mudar de seção, né? Se você tem que mudar de seção para continuar expandindo a sua mensagem, você tem que ir para um livro que tenha mais vocabulário associado, previsível associado na mesma página, tá? So, last question. Gostaria de saber mais sobre a experiência da Gail com a CAA para o público que apresenta deficiência visual cortical. So, I would like to know more about Gail's experience with AAC for kids who have CVI.
That's a huge question. Lots and lots and lots of experience for decades. So we've been creating, I've been implementing robust language systems with kids who have auditory scanning needs and auditory plus visual scanning needs, alternative symbols if they can use direct access, auditory cueing, since the 1980s. So we've got better at it since then, but we've definitely been using the pod systems with those guys since the early 1990s, and developing those systems. They yeah, so there's lots of experience and lots of success stories. And in the pod systems, it very much you can go from the earliest first words, early functions, through to complex syntax, regardless of whether you can see or you can't see. So there are possibilities for that pathway through to complex syntax for individuals with vision challenges. Not everyone, of course, gets to that complexity of language. Each individual takes their own pathway, but there is possibilities within the pod system. Yeah.
A Gayle diz que tem
We
muita
hope, Linda
experiência.
and I hope that they'll be out in English sometime next year, but yeah.
A Gayle tem muita experiência, ela trabalha com indivíduos com deficiência visual cortical desde 1900, dos meados de 1990. Ela já usou pod com vários deles, muitos chegaram a livros de sintaxe complexa, não são todos, mas muitos sim, e a questão visual não é um impeditivo aí para se desenvolver linguagem complexa, tá?
I think with people with multiple challenges, it's really critical that you work out what language do they need, what communication and language do they need. That's your first.
Então, para indivíduos com deficiências complexas, você primeiro tem que entender qual é a linguagem que eles precisam.
And then you think about the access methods and the presentations that will support that level of language.
Então, primeiro o nível de linguagem e depois você pensa no método de acesso e de apresentação para atender as necessidades desse indivíduo dentro desse nível de linguagem.
Because in a communication system, communication and language wins. The question is not what can they see, but can they use vision to meet their communication and language requirements, and how? Yeah.
Yes. Então, o que a gente devia entender é os requisitos e nível de linguagem para definir acesso, para definir a apresentação desses símbolos para atender aos requisitos de comunicação. One last question, and I know this is easy for you to answer. When are you gonna be in Brazil? Quando que a Gayle vem para o Brasil?
Oh, you can answer that, can't you?
Ano que vem.
Over.
Next year. So, ano que vem, gente.
November, December, something like that, isn't it?
End of November.
End
No
of
final
November.
de novembro, a Gayle está no Brasil, tá?
Yeah.
Então, está respondida essa pergunta. Gayle, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and
Your generosity.
For inviting me. Hopefully it helps, and enjoy the rest of your conference.
Thank you for accepting her invitation. Thank you so much. Gente, muito, muito obrigado. Quero agradecer. A gente passou muito do nosso tempo, a gente atrasou um pouco para começar. Agradecer a Gayle, agradecer a todo mundo que esteve aqui, que ficou aqui até agora. Obrigado, boa noite, gente. Thank you, Gayle. Good night.
Thank you.
Well, good morning for you. Good day.
Morning for me. Well, nearly lunchtime. Okay.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Tchau, gente. Gente, muito obrigada a todos e a gente se vê amanhã para continuar o nosso congresso. Obrigada, boa noite.